Hello, everyone. Mike Brandinetti is on the line from Reduxio's DevOps Center in Tel Aviv, Israel. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 5th VMUG webinar that Reduxio has hosted. And this is the second in our 4-part series that will continue through the rest of this quarter through the end of the calendar year. As you can see from my bio, yes, I'm both Chief Marketing and Corporate Strategy Officer at Reduxio, but I've also been a Professor of Innovation for 20 years. And in this instance, I'm taking on a dual role today as I moderate this panel. My commitment and Reduxio's commitment is to stay away from anything other than providing objective educational content out of respect for the technical competence of the VMUG community. We also want to provide you with very practical, technical insights. And we want to be able to share those insights with you from deeply experienced professionals. And I think today, as we tackle the subject of how to handle VDI bootstrings with ease, we've got literally a world-class panel. So if we can move to the next slide and look at today's agenda. We're going to hear from 3 subject matter experts today, and I'm going to introduce them in more detail as they step up to take the microphone. The first part of our agenda today is going to be led by Stu Miniman. Stu is a senior analyst with Wikibon, and he's the co-host of a rapidly growing community called theCUBE. And he's going to be taking a very clear-eyed look at virtual desktop infrastructure. We're then going to move into what is always a highlight of each of our webinars, which is a fireside chat with a real user, and with Steve Koidek, who is the network administrator at the Manchester Essex Regional School District. We're going to spend some time with him going into detail about his 9 years of experience in running a large VDI infrastructure. And then finally, we're going to hear from a colleague of mine, Fred Nix. Fred is the Global Pre-Sales Director with Reduxio, deeply experienced, as he has spent many, many years as the lead of the VMware expert team. So let's now go to, if we can, the bios, and let me introduce each of our 3 speakers in slightly more detail. So we're going to start with Stu, and maybe the most important thing I can say about Stu is that Stu has literally been working with VMware ESX since 2001, 2002. While he was at EMC, he was one of the first people to actually sign an NDA in order to be able to work with the folks from VMware. Today, he is a principal research contributor at Wikibon, which is an up-and-coming, very highly focused industry analyst firm. He's a very active member of a number of their practices, their networking practice, both their Ethernet and SAN practice, as well as their virtualization and cloud communities. He's been a longtime proponent of linking information and people in IT by providing leverage from the latest tools and processes, both from the innovation community and the social media community, a passion that I share as well. And if you look at what he's done professionally, he spent over 10 years with EMC. His primary focus at that time was on storage networking and virtualization technologies. Before EMC, he was with Lucent. He worked with voice, video, data solutions, and he spent some time at American Power Conversion. The second speaker today in order will be Steve Koidek. Steve is very much known as an early adopter within the educational sector. Steve's school, the Manchester Essex Regional School District, was one of the very first schools to adopt VDI infrastructure. Steve's been running a large 300 instance VDI infrastructure for over 9 years, so he has a lot of experience in what's worked and what hasn't worked, and he's got a lot of tips to share with you. And then we'll close out today's discussion with Fred Nix from Reduxio, who runs Global Pre-Sales. Fred was on the leadership team of the vSpecialist group, and he worked directly under Chad Sakic. So Fred is very well known to this community. So why don't we move forward and turn this over now to Stu Miniman.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike, and hi to everyone. I want to start out, Mike mentioned that I've been working with VMware since early days. Back ESX 1.5.2 is the first solution that I looked at. Back in those days, just what a hypervisor was in virtualization was something that people were trying to get their arms around. And of course, everybody here kind of knows that wave and where we've got to today. But it took a number of years before I got involved in VDI. It was really when I became an analyst that I spent some time digging into it. And there was a lot of differences between server virtualization and VDI. So that's just one of the warnings I want to give up front, that server virtualization initial deployments are pretty standard. I take a server, I load a hypervisor, I get things running, and it moves pretty straightforward. But VDI touches a lot of pieces architecturally as well as organizationally, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. So wanted to have a little fun here. Is there's every year analysts always make predictions, and they're asked to forecast things. And the running joke in the industry for I believe it's been the last decade is this the year of VDI? So I created the first one on the left there, Samuel Jackson. Say it's the year of VDI one more time. At an open source event this year, they actually made a big deal that Linux desktops had actually reached really broad adoption at this point, and it was joking. It's like, hey, look, it's the year of Linux desktops. If you actually start searching and researching VDI, you will find lots of jokes and memes along this line, because there's been a lot of hype and a lot of misconceptions. Because to my point that I made before, VDI is not simple, and there's a lot of nuance and things that you need to work through to be able to roll these out. I did some research back in 2011, and I called this my really ugly Tetris stack. And one of the reasons I made it ugly is because each piece of this is something that you need to understand the technology, dig into it deeper, and really understand what you're going to change. Because, as I said before, it's not simply thrown on a hypervisor and now I've got a little bit more flexibility and utilization like with server virtualization. But VDI is, I'm really changing the architecture from everyone having their desktops, and there's usually somebody that runs around from office to office or deals with patching and upgrades and the like on the desktop, to I'm creating an enterprise stack for desktop virtualization. And the thing that I'll highlight, and I know we're going to dig into with Fred's piece a little bit later, and I'm sure Stephen's going to talk about it from the customer viewpoint. Storage tends to get a lot of the focus. One, because storage tends to be one of the historically more expensive pieces. It is one of the areas that is probably most critical to where failures happen. So just to touch on a couple of things here, for years and years, it seems that you would go from when you say, okay, I want to do VDI, I prototype it, I pilot it, and roll it out, there's well documented some of the cases that this fails. So you want to learn from those that have gone before you and make sure that you don't fail with the same ways. The first thing, of course, performance is a real concern. If you think back to server virtualization, it was really helping us get more utility out of what we had before. Most servers were running at a very small utilization, usually 5, 10, 15%. So consolidating a number of images on a single server is pretty straightforward. When you have desktops and laptops, you buy a system, and it's usually over-engineered for what the typical user needs. If I take hundreds or thousands of them and put them together, I want to make sure that the user gets what they need to do their job. The last thing you want to do is roll something out and all of a sudden have all your users say, gee, all my applications are running slow, I'm running out of memory, it doesn't work, because that will be a very fast track to failing on your VDI deployment. So as I mentioned, Fred's going to talk about, boot storms are one of those things that have historically been a bottleneck. With modern storage architectures, with the broad advent of flash and newer storage solutions and networking components of the storage network, we've been rapidly attacking that space. The other one I want to point out, because we've seen many customers fail on it, is when we scale an environment. Once again, if I start with a prototype, or if I have a small group that is using a solution, and when I want to roll that out, if it's not the same architecture, too many traditional architectures is, for the amount of VMs and desktops that I'm going to deploy, if I'm doing a handful versus 100 versus 1,000, it might be different sized boxes, might even be different varieties of the branches of the storage OS that those customers have. So look for solutions that have more what we would call that scale-out architecture. Hyperconverged infrastructure falls into that environment. Most of these software-defined storage solutions really fit into those. But be real careful that you're not just taking an older storage architecture, even if it has high performance, and throwing it in there, because scalability can be one of those real choke points. So, as I mentioned, there's a big stack here, and I mentioned again just simplification. If I look at this stack and if I think of if I can have pieces that kind of meld together, I mentioned hyperconverged infrastructure. There's many solutions that will take pieces of this stack and deliver them in a single component. Anything I can do to simplify, makes that much easier and one less piece that you need to manage independently, and the organizational pieces we want to worry about too. Many people have gone down this path. What I've got listed here is some of the journey. What I want you to think about is, well, I'm sure most of the people on this call are really focused on the infrastructure components. What you want to do with VDI is step back for a second and really think about the users, think about how they're going to be accessing their application, and think about their data, because the major drivers for this is really about not cost savings, but giving your workforce the applications and the data where they need it, when they need it. One of the earliest use cases that we saw broad adoption of VDI was for healthcare. If you think of a typical doctor, they're not sitting in their office all the time, working on a single laptop, but they need to be with the patient in whatever device they're on. They need to have access to the records in a secure way. And look through that. So this is kind of the journey, and as I said on the top of the call, these slides will all go out. If you also just Google Wikibon and VDI, you can find this content pretty easily. But moving down that journey from just desktops and individual information to more dispersed mobile type of environment. So just like we've seen with all of the IT discussions, the challenge of the day really is distributed architectures, and how do I make sure that I can get the data where I need it, of course constrained by the physics of information is tough to move, and I need it on the device that I need it on, and it still needs to be secure. So that's something that the ecosystem has really been working on from a strong standpoint. Digging in a little deeper, if you look at storage, I mentioned it's the throughput, it's I/O. Latency is, of course, critically important. Anybody on here that's dealing with storage understands that. It's not just kind of the average, but it is the consistency that I have. Once again, Fred's going to be talking about boot storms. This is one of the big concerns. I know when I worked for a large many thousand person organization, even when we didn't have desktop virtualization, when I would show up on a Monday morning and turn my machine on, and it would go through all of its updates, I'd take a walk to the cafeteria, get a nice hot beverage, because that first half hour my system would be completely unusable. When you're architecting and building this out, you need to make sure that your VDI deployment can handle this and manage it so it's consistent. Flash, I mentioned, helps and definitely delivers on the IOPS and the performance that we need, but it is not a silver bullet. As a networking person, the thing I want to reinforce is there's no such thing as eliminating a bottleneck. You're simply moving it. So there's some nice things that Fred's going to talk about how Reduxio really attacks this in a really novel way to make sure that you get the performance when you need it at a cost-effective manner. But really want to dig in and make sure you really understand your users, their profiles, and what's happening there. Last thing I want to touch on is just some guidance going forward. When you look at these modern architectures, its simplification is the most important piece. While cost savings overall, of course, are important, at least most companies that I'm talking to these days, it is the speed of deployment, the productivity of their workers are going to be much more important than saving, an extra cent on the, per gigabyte that you're saving on the device. So make sure you've got properly architected between what you need from a performance standpoint. Standardization is really critical. One of the sins that we've had in IT for way too long is that everybody asks for some customization. And while you want people to be happy, from an IT standpoint, it makes it very difficult to be able to have repeatable processes and that scale that I mentioned. I would much rather see when you roll out desktop environments that you kind of over-architect them than allow for too much customization. Because if you have lots of different desktop images, it's going to be difficult for you to manage them. It's difficult for you to forecast and increase your infrastructure to match what customers need. So when you look at that boundary between standardization and customization, you really want to try to err on the side of standardization. Once again, that might be a slight trade-off for cost. I'd love to hear from the Stephen as to how they approach this when Mike's going to be talking to them. But it really is, you need to have more, what we say today at Wikibon is that cloud-like environment. I consume services, I deliver services to my users. I don't spend too much time getting in there with the geek knobs. And while I know the virtualization community loves playing with all the adjustments and tweaks and settings, it is something that we, as a whole, spend too much time on, and therefore, if we can buy solutions and standardize a little bit more, it's going to allow us more time to focus on delivering more value to the business. Last thing I want to emphasize on here is it takes a village to deploy these VDI solutions properly. Make sure that you're getting out of the silos. Storage people, you need to be talking to the network. When you're a standalone desktop, you have everything locally. When I'm going to centralized storage, I need to make sure that I've got proper networking connectivity. Wi-Fi can be the death of these deployments. Security settings and firewalls can be the death of these deployments. There's lots of things that you need to have a holistic view and get everybody bought in on what they're doing. So what I say here, the technology might not be the easy part when rolling out these solutions, but absolutely the people and processes can easily torpedo what we're working on. So appreciate your time. Looking forward to hearing some of your questions, and want to hand it back to Mike to hear the customer viewpoint.
Stu, that was great. Thank you so much. And again, looking forward to hearing some of the questions that are directed your way. So I'd like to now reintroduce Steve Kwiatek. Steve, it would be great if you could just maybe spend a few minutes sharing with our listeners today a little bit about your professional background. I know that you've been with the Manchester Essex Regional School District for some time, but can you take us through your IT career, if you would, up until this point, and the kind of technologies that you've worked with? Yeah.
So I've been working in education for a little over 20 years. I've spent the last 19 years in the Manchester Essex Regional School District. I've also been a consultant and have had many experiences in different cloud infrastructures over the last 20 years. With the Manchester Essex School District, it's a smaller district. It's only comprised of 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. And as I said, we had deployed our virtual environment using VMware about 9 years ago. And we included both our servers and a little over 300 virtual desktops that we've been running over the last 9 years. Up till about a year ago, I was running on a different storage unit and now have been running in production on a Reduxio unit for a little over a year now. Our end users are pretty much students and teachers and administrative staff. And our demand is to pretty much keep the system up and running, and having peak performance times is usually any time in the morning and afternoons for our business.
So, Stu, that's great. Maybe just a little bit more about the IT infrastructure that's in place today. So obviously running virtual infrastructure, you've got Reduxio involved in primary storage, but can you describe that a little bit more broadly?
Sure. So our infrastructure is pretty much created and comprised of HP servers, obviously the Reduxio storage, extreme switching. We've got wireless. We have a 10 gig backbone from the servers to the switches to the closets, and we run 1 gig to every desktop. We have a very solid infrastructure in place, and it's really an important thing that I've heard from other people, that the issues that they've had when they've had VDI in place, that they don't always have the right infrastructure set up from the beginning. As Stu had said, it's important to really build it and have it built right, making sure that all the pieces and parts, and there are lots of pieces and parts between the switching, the routing, that they all need to work together, and one little thing can throw everything off. Our biggest our biggest
Please.
challenges pretty much have been that we're a smaller district, and with being a smaller district, sometimes you have small staff. Everybody has to wear many hats. You might be the server administrator as well as the database admin. You might be the storage admin. You might be the networking admin. So having all those hats to wear, it often is harder to have all these different companies you're working with, the different storage vendors, the different networking vendors, the server vendors. So having things that simplify my life really is like what makes it easier for me to do my job and to keep everything up and running. So when I had first looked out there for a different storage unit from what I was working with, I found Reduxio and really felt that it was going to simplify my life and ease the management that I use every day. Their interface is so easy to understand. It's very user-friendly. And, it might not be something, as I said, I wear many different hats. So I might not be in the web interface every day or even every week, but when I need to log into it, it doesn't take me long to see what I need to find or build. And I can remember back to when I was with my previous company, it was the same sort of thing. I'd log in when I needed to do something, and it was so complicated it would take me forever to remember how it worked and which areas I needed to use to implement new things. But, with the Reduxio unit, it's definitely been a great unit for me.
That's great, Steve. And Steve, I'm going to just take a step back again, just maybe talk a bit more broadly about just the VDI infrastructure. And as you described, a lot of challenges, a lot of moving parts. Stu identified a number of things that you've got to be very aware of. I can imagine that your 9-year journey from being a very early adopter of implementing a virtual environment in VDI in a small school district, you've learned some things along the way. So what were some of the mistakes that you might have made early on that, and I know you've referenced the fact that you've got to architect this thing in a certain way, but any specific mistakes that you would call out to help some of our other listeners potentially avoid? And some of the key insights that you've gleaned from those challenging experiences that you had?
Sure. So some of the main issues that we've only had over the years have had to deal with, storms of updates, whether it's malware or antivirus updates that are, being forced out to the machines. So really having ways of spreading them out so that they're not causing those storms has been the main issue that we've had over the years. But really it's been, the issues that I have seen, I haven't seen personally. I've talked with a lot of other end users and other companies and schools that have set out on this journey too. And the main issue that I've been told that they've had over the years has just been that their storage doesn't have the right, amount of IOPS, or they didn't plan well enough ahead in time to make sure that, their routing and their switching has been robust enough to be able to handle the amount of traffic that it really needs to. So, when we had put ours in, we were lucky enough at the time to be building a brand new school, and we had the budget, so we built ours from the ground up. We didn't have to piecemeal it together. Everything was done right, and really haven't had any issues when it comes to our virtual deployment and, the uses.
Okay. So other than, swapping in Reduxio for your prior storage vendor, were there other components that you moved out either because they just became technically obsolete or, weren't able to deliver the performance required to manage the environment? Any other things that needed to be adjusted and refined?
Yeah, previously to upgrading to our Reduxio system, we implemented new 10 gig switching for our backbone. We previously had multiple 1 gig uplinks between our storage unit and the servers and the storage, so that obviously moving to the 10 gig has been a huge increase for production.
Okay. And as you sit here today, do you anticipate any significant changes over the next 18 to 24 months in the environment? Anything new on the horizon that you see that will allow you to deliver even better SLAs to your user community, or you think you're in pretty good shape at this point given what the demands on the network are?
Yeah, I think we're in good shape. As I said, we've actually already have increased our storage. We've added new switching. We've pretty much updated all of our wireless throughout our buildings so that there's enough faster Wi-Fi between, the end client and the servers. So really, we have a very robust system. We're not really looking at upgrading or updating any other pieces at this time.
Okay. So, Stu, one of the things you mentioned about Reduxio was the fact that it's been designed for a simplified user experience, take away some complexity, so that even if you're not, living in the Reduxio portal day in and day out, you can kind of get back to a place where you're very comfortable and very productive quickly. Are you seeing those trends in general in other IT infrastructure? Is this something that is becoming more commonplace, or do you think that Reduxio is a bit unique in this regard, based on the environment that you've been working with and the vendors you're working with?
I definitely feel that Reduxio's interface is more unique than others that I've seen. They definitely put, I think, a lot of effort and time into making sure that it was very user-friendly, that, you weren't having to click more than a couple clicks to get something done. It's really been an eye-opener on really how hard I had it before I had moved over to this unit.
Yeah. Okay. So, and from a impact on your daily productivity or your weekly productivity, is it a material difference in saving you time or giving you an opportunity to work on things that perhaps are a little bit more strategic in nature as a result of that?
It's definitely increased productivity because I'm not spending as much time when I need to when I'm working with storage to kind of figure out what I needed to do. It's very user-friendly. So.
Okay, that's great. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners today, just as a colleague, to say, these are some of the lessons learned, these are some of the tips and tricks that I would recommend that you be aware of as you either start the VDI journey or sort of take the next step along the journey that you haven't yet had a chance to address?
Well, definitely I would say having the right storage with the right amount of IOPS has been the main concentration for what we've needed to do for our VDI to make sure that it's had the right amount of performance for our end users. It's more or less also an additional kind of backup as far as backing up all of our systems on a more minute-by-minute basis. I've always been concerned about zero-day attacks and other ransomware attacks. Having this system in place has definitely helped us to add an additional layer of disaster recovery into our plans.
Okay, that's great. And obviously this is a growing concern, growing issue for all of our users. And we hear from some of our users they're under continuous attack. Can you comment a little bit more about that? Right, we're living in this incredibly challenging era. Are there stories around backdating or recovery from challenges like that you can share with our audience?
Sure. Well, I mean, we haven't had any zero-day or ransomware attacks, but we do have incremental backups that are run every day, and kept for extended periods of time. I did have one user who had created a document in the morning, had worked on it for several hours. They had it only saved to their desktop, and sometime after lunchtime ended up deleting it accidentally. We didn't have it in any of our incremental backups just because of the short time frame that the file had been created and then destroyed. So normally it would have been gone, but luckily enough I had remembered, hey, we got Reduxio, so I went back to the LUN, pulled the file off of a backdated timestamp, and was able to restore the file within minutes, which saved this person their hours of work they had really put into it. So stuff
That's
like
great.
that,
And
only something that helps me sleep better at night.
I love it. Well, Steve Kwiatek from Manchester Regional School District, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. And now I want to turn the podium over to our final speaker. Once again, Fred Nix, a great colleague of mine, the Global Pre-Sales Director at Reduxio, someone who has been around the VMware and the virtualization space for quite some time. I think it bears repeating that he was on the leadership team of the VMware specialist team under Chad Sackich for quite some time. I think he's a very well-known member of this community. He's spent a lot of time in a lot of user accounts all around the world. And I'm going to ask him now to take us through his experiences with a specific focus on how to manage your way through a VDI boot storm. So Fred, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, thanks a lot. Hey, everybody. So I want to get started and talk a little bit about Reduxio and how it can help you through really two different things. And I'm going to keep it really succinct. I'm going to go through some slides, and I'm going to try to get to the demo as soon as possible because I know that more people are more concerned or more anxious to see the demonstration more so than a bunch of slides. So I'm going to get started here. So there's really two different things we want to talk about. Number one is that, and Steve talked about it a little bit, the ability to go back and to recover information and data to the second. So Steve talked a little bit about a user that had a document that they were working on that morning, and they would not have been able to recover that document had they not had Reduxio because the incremental backups would only run. So I'm guessing in the evening. In the way back when's, we'd rely on backups for our data protection. Moving into the last decade or so, we rely on our snapshots abilities. But even if you're running snapshots at, even every hour or so, he may or may not have been able to capture that data. Well, we're redefining the application and data recovery, and we're able to use what we call backdating. And backdating actually can recover data to any second in time that you have the data that's been alive. So think about like in Steve's example, a user created a document. They were able to go back in time. He was able to recover that data to the second. Think about being able to backdate, as we call it, backdate your virtual machines to the second, backdate any data to the second, your application to the second. And we're going to take a look at how that's done in a virtual environment. So that's one thing that we're going to take a look at. The second thing we're going to take a look at is our tiering mechanisms, which allow you to have flash performance at maybe not even a flash price. So here we show data represented by the disk there in the VDI 1 session. And as data moves through our systems, and so the presentation system kind of mauled up my presentation there. This disk is supposed to relax here onto the hard drive system. So let's pretend that this is here on the hard drive. So if we tier and we see that the next VDI desktop sees the same information, and it would bounce around, and maybe because it's seen that same information, let's pretend that the presentation system got this right and it ended up on SSD. So think of your first VDI system seeing data and information, and it tiered down to a hard drive, and then maybe the next VDI session uses some of the same information, maybe the same printer.dll, and it might promote it up to the SSD file. And then if you can imagine the third one or beyond seeing that same information or that same printer.dll, what would happen is it would promote itself up to the RAM. So our RAM is not cache, it's actually an additional tier and actually additive to your storage. So let's imagine all three of these systems were to see the same printer.dll. What would happen is that information would be shared across all of your systems through RAM. So that's how we get the speed increases, and that's how we avoid boot storms as well. So whenever a Windows system boots up, you can imagine that everybody's VDI is more or less the same information, except for their different kid picture or their different cat picture on the desktop. So more or less the VDI systems end up being the same things over and over. So now let's take a little darker turn. What happens, and Steve was lucky enough that he had mentioned that he had not had ransomware, but what happens when you do get ransomware? You've got really two choices. You can go to your backups, maybe go back to a snapshot if you have one, or you can pay the dark guy in the hoodie, which is never a good idea. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at exactly what would happen if we did get ransomware on a virtual machine. So we're going to go to the demonstration phase. So look, mom, no hands. I'm going to minimize this. And can we see my desktop there? I'm going to guess that we can here. Let's see here. Can we see the desktop? All right, now I'm hoping that you can see the desktop. So this is the interface that Steve was talking about. It's fairly simple. It is a HTML5 GUI. I can drag and drop IOPS. I can drag and drop any of the different alerts, capacity or throughput. So I can take a look right here. I show 10 hosts with 8 connected, and I've got a little bit of load on the system. It looks like about 50,000 IOPS, and that is running from IOmeter, about half and half write and read. And I want to kind of just go through and take a look real fast at my statistics. We see that we were running at 50,000 IOPS. And here's the tiering engine that I wanted to kind of point out. This is so when we have writes come in, it hits our what we call our fully automated tiering engine, and it decides should it write it directly to RAM, should it write it directly to flash, or should it write it directly, which we see it has not chose to write to disk yet, but it does read from disk. So now let's go to how we could recover a virtual machine in the instance of a ransomware attack here. And I'm clicking on my screen here, and I'm loading up vSphere. Everybody's probably very used to seeing this screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to simulate the failure of a virtual machine and see how quickly it is with Reduxio to go ahead and revert that virtual machine back to any second in time that we choose. So I'm going to click on host and clusters. I'm going to go down and I'm going to select the last demo. This would be a VDI session. I've got a little bit less than maybe 40 VDI sessions going, starting at 05 and going down to 48, so I'm going to guess right at 40. So let's imagine that we're going to show two things here. Number one, we're going to show if we lost a virtual machine, how we could take it back to any second in time very, very easily. And we're also going to show, I'm going to boot up all of these virtual machines all at the same time and simulate a boot storm. So as you can see, they're turned off now, and we're going to turn them on all at the same time. So imagine if I had a corruption in 48, or number 48 happened to be a very important VIP's virtual desktop. All I'd have to do if I got a corruption, oh crap, 48's got a problem, all I do is right click it. I can go to Reduxio Actions, and I hit this backdate option. And that backdate option brings me to a page where I can, so it prompts me and says, okay, this is for VDI VM number 48. I'm going to say I want to go back in history. I'll click the history tab, and I'm just going to say, you know what, let's go back to this morning at 11:42 and 40 seconds. Go. So I'm going to say, I'm just going to clone that, and it's going to prompt me for the clone name. So I'll call it Z Windows Demo 42-VIP. And it gives me the option of what virtual host I want to put that on. So I'm going to pick number 62. I also have the option to power on and then disconnect the network adapters just so that we don't have any MAC address problems or any kind of DHCP issues. So I'm going to say clone there. So this says clone task successfully submitted, and I can review what's going on down here in the tasks. So right now, remember, we got about 50,000 IOPS, and Steve, our customer earlier, talked about how important it is to have a good solid set of IOPS or capacity. So let's just keep torturing this thing. So while it's going now, I'm going to go ahead, and I'm also going to go into Atlanta demo area. I'm going to go related options and go to my virtual machines. And now we're going to simulate a boot storm. So if I go here to 5, and I'm going to scoot down here all the way down to 47 since 48 is being cloned, I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to say power. It says 39 virtual machines selected, so right there at 40. And I'm going to power them all on all at the same time, simulating a boot storm. Now, I want you all to think about what would happen in your own environment if you were to power on that many virtual machines all at the same time. Probably would not be a wonderful time for your environment. And as we can see down here in the bottom of this, I prefer the VIC because it shows better information in the recent task, but that's just me. So as we see here, we're powering on a bunch of machines. We're renaming data stores. We're powering on, we're reconfiguring virtual machines here. We're setting policies. We're doing all kinds of stuff, and we're moving quite along. And all the while, if I move over here to my performance, I can see on our Reduxio box that we're holding right at just under 50,000 IOPS. We're keeping the latency down at less than 1, and our total megabytes, that's the big M, throughput is getting up there at 500 megabits, the big M, per second. So we're hauling right along there. I'm going to come back to the VIC here so we can kind of keep track of what's going on. We've got a lot of things that have been completed. I'm going to go ahead and look up here at one of my virtual machines and right-click on it, just a random one. Let's pick, can't quite see it there. We're going to just right-click one. Hit the circle of death here. All right, the VIC's not responding. I think we're overdoing it here. All right, so I'll right-click it. We're going to cancel that. Right-click it, open the console, and if luck has it, come on, baby. There it comes. So this is my Windows Demo 5 machine that's still booting up, but we are handling the boot storm quite well. And let's scoot down here and take a look and see if we can find our Windows Demo 40. I feel like my Windows machine is kind of locked up here. I did say, look, my no hands. Come on, baby. Well, there it kind of goes. It's kind of responding to me now. There we go. And as you can see, my Windows Demo 42 machine is now available. I'm going to open the console on it. And taking just a second here. This is the virtual machine that we backdated to 11:40 this morning. I think I might have better luck if I go into the actual VIC here and go to, there it is. Let's say open console there. There we go. So this is the virtual machine that we backdated that we had corruption problems, and as you can see, it's already booted up and ready to go. And also, you can also see that all of our other virtual machines that we had created a boot storm have all booted as well and are now running VMware tools. And that's kind of the secret, folks, that you can tell when a virtual machine is booted or not, is if the VMware virtual tools are running. And if we just click on a couple of random ones without having to open the console, we can see that VMware tools is in fact running on all these. So we did boot up 39 virtual machines. I didn't time myself. But we looks like we handled having 50,000 IOPS on an IO meter running. We backdated a virtual machine of a VIP, and we're able to boot that guy up. We were able to boot up 40 machines, and we all did that right here from within the the VMware Virtual Center. So, and there it is, the VMware MAC conflict I was talking about. That's why we didn't turn on the networking. So, I hope that was interesting to you guys and gals out there. I'm ready to take some questions. We're going to go back into the ON24 interface and go into the Q&A session. So I know Eyal was going to give me a hand with some of the questions. So Eyal, can you help me jump in here and help moderate for me? And thank you everybody for coming. We had a great time. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. So, Fred, can you reply to this question? Do you have any advantage as far as security and isolation of the infected machine? I think this question was posted early in the Q&A in the fireside chat with Steve. I mean, I know we've discussed backdating, but can you provide some context now?
Right. So for those of you that know me that I'm a pretty straight shooter and I don't BS things. The question as it sits right there is, do we have an advantage? Advantage might be a stretch. We do have the ability to isolate infected machines by being able to create clones, and we can create a clone to the second. So if you had a machine that did have a problem, you'd be able to boot that up and go into the console through vCenter and be able to work on that machine kind of as a, to be able to look and see and make sure that there's, nothing else, or try to isolate that machine and disinfect it and figure out exactly where your problem was. Do we have an advantage? I don't want to stretch it that far, but we do have the ability to help you to backdate a machine to any second in time and kind of watch and see exactly along the time period, exactly what happened. So I'd say that would be an advantage, that you can go take an infected machine to any second in time and see exactly where your problem started. So maybe there, but for those of you that know me, you know I don't stretch the truth on things, so I want to make sure I'm very cautious on that word advantage. So I hope that answers your question. If not, hit me up on Twitter at NixFred or fred@reduxio.com, or I'll be happy to talk with you by voice if that helps to answer your question. So any other questions I can answer out there?
Yeah, we have a few. I think this one is for Stu. There was talk about initially moving the bottlenecks. Where exactly has this bottleneck been moved to?
Yeah, so, right, it was talking about that there's always somewhere from an architectural standpoint you need to worry about. Steve talked about he upgraded to 10 gig, network. If you fixed the bottleneck of the storage solution, then chances are you need to look at the bottleneck of the network itself. Then you need to look at, often to the end device itself. So, and once you've got all that sorted out, you'll probably get some new application that'll put a different stress on it. So it's constantly looking at the system, the applications, where your users are in totality is the point that I was looking to make there.
Got it.
And Stu, for Reduxio, we look at competing with all flash vendors. We actually have a RAM tier. So, think of it as an even faster tier than just flash that's able to handle some of those bottlenecks.
Absolutely.
So we have a question around that topic, Fred. We have this one. If you're using cache to process, can you dive a little bit deeper into this topic?
We have a RAM tier, we have a flash tier, and we have a hard drive tier. So we're not using cache. The actual RAM is a tier of storage. So when we ingest data, we compress it, we deduplicate it, which we call no dupe, because there's mathematically 0 duplicate 8K blocks in our system. But we're not using cache. We are using a direct RAM drive on our machine that processes data just as a normal tier of storage. So it is a differentiator.
Got it. Thank you. Let me keep sending some questions to the slide area. Okay, for Steve, best practices to give access to users. No, first, I don't think. Stu, can you address this one? I think it makes more sense.
I'm not sure I quite understand what they're asking there.
Okay, let me get back to this one, and then I'll move this one.
So let me try to tackle that at a very high level.
Sure.
So you really have to determine whether you want to use, our choice that we like is VMware or XenDesktop or Citrix. So really, best practice really depends on which of those flavors of, Horizon View versus XenDesktop versus, there's a multitude of open source projects out there. So it really depends, what protocols you want to use. Your first step is to determine what vendor that you want to use for your virtual desktop instances. And again, not to be too repetitive, but we're big fans of VMware, but there's also Zendesk. There's also others out there that you can take a look at. And can I explain the remote objects shown in the tiering tab? Somebody's paying attention there, huh? So we have the ability to answer this question. We have the ability when I showed the tiering tab. Let me see if I could go back to that easily. And so my guess is the person that's asking that question is talking about this object right here, and you're paying attention. So, and I like that. So as the industry stands, the first tiers of storage or first line of storage typically have not been quite innovative in the last 10 or so years. And I don't want to put Stu on the spot, but snapshots were over 15 years old, and because the tier 1 storage industry really hasn't kept up in Reduxio's opinion, you've had to use other products to be able to back up your tier 1 storage. So we have the ability here within Reduxio, which was not part of so if you look right here, AWS, so we can actually directly back up our volumes or ones, if you use that terminology, directly to AWS and restore those to any S3 object store or any other iSCSI platform. So it's a little bit out of scope of this talk, but I'm more than happy to discuss this with anyone that has further questions on that. Please contact me at @NixFred on Twitter or fred@reduxio.com. And I'm being prodded here that we need to get on to more questions. So next question, please. Yeah?
Yep, it's there.
All right, Reduxio is a storage solution or backup solution or both? How do you explain? So that's a great question, and I'm really sorry that I didn't, I kind of went past that because I didn't want to spend time on who we are, because sometimes that gets boring when a vendor just kind of throws up on you who they are and when they're created, blah, blah. But yes, we are a storage solution, and we're a backup solution, so both. So we can back up our primary tiers to S3 object stores, including Amazon or your own. We could back up to any iSCSI storage, including our own. But if you had EMC VNX laying around, which I've spent a lot of time at EMC, so love those guys over and gals over in Dell. Love to my friends over there. But if you had some older storage laying around, we can back up directly from Reduxio directly to an S3 object store or an iSCSI platform. So yes, we are a primary storage solution. We're backed by Intel, Seagate, and a little company called Amazon, and we're quite proud of that. So again, if anybody would like to follow up with me, I'm just fred@reduxio.com, and I'm happy to have a voice conversation with you or email conversation or carrier pigeon conversation, whichever you choose.
Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you next time.